My beloved child. There are moments in life that seem ordinary on the surface, yet beneath them, something profound is quietly unfolding. Last night may have appeared like any other evening, but the story did not end when the stars filled the sky. While the world slept, hearts continued their silent conversations, prayers continued their unseen journey, and emotions that had been hidden for far too long began to rise where no one else could witness them. If you have been carrying questions that refuse to leave your mind, if your heart has sensed that something is changing without knowing exactly what, do not ignore that feeling. Sometimes the deepest truths arrive long before they reveal their faces. You have wondered why certain moments have felt strangely different lately. Why memories return without warning. Why hope appears in your heart just when you thought you had finally let go. These are not meaningless coincidences inside this story. Every chapter has been preparing you for a moment that is closer than you realize. What happened last night is not important because of noise or drama. It matters because it uncovered something that could no longer remain hidden forever. Someone reached a point where silence became heavier than words. Someone who believed they could continue pretending discovered that the heart rarely follows the plans of the mind. Yet this is not only their story. It is also yours. You have spent more time growing than you realize. Even on the days when progress felt invisible, every disappointment taught you patience. Every unanswered question strengthened your character. Every closed door quietly redirected your path toward something you could not yet understand. Growth often feels lonely because it happens before the reward appears. That is why many people stop believing just before everything begins to change. But you kept moving. Not perfectly. Not fearlessly. Simply faithfully. And that quiet perseverance has started creating ripples far beyond what your eyes can see. Meanwhile, another heart has been wrestling with thoughts they can no longer dismiss. They replay conversations. They remember details they once overlooked. They ask themselves questions they never expected to ask. Why does this person remain in my thoughts? Why does their absence feel louder than their presence once did? Why can't I simply move on? Sometimes answers arrive only after a person finally becomes honest with themselves. And honesty, though uncomfortable, has a remarkable way of changing everything. Still, do not mistake this moment as the ending. It is only the first page of a chapter neither of you expected to write. Because there is one detail about last night that changes the meaning of everything before it. A single realization. A single moment. A single decision made in complete silence. One that no one else witnessed. And once you understand what that decision was, you will see this entire journey through completely different eyes. But before that truth can be revealed, you must first understand why it took so long for this hidden story to reach this point. Because the next chapter begins where certainty ends, there is something remarkable about waiting. Not because waiting is easy, but because it quietly reveals what the heart truly values. While time seemed to stand still, countless unseen lessons were shaping both paths. You may have believed nothing was changing, yet every sunrise carried a purpose that could not be rushed. Think about a seed beneath the earth. For a long season, it appears lifeless. No one applauds its hidden growth. No one celebrates its silent transformation. Yet beneath the surface, roots are reaching deeper before the first leaf ever greets the light. So it has been with this story. Last night did not suddenly create these emotions. It simply brought them into the open where they could no longer be ignored. There was a moment. A quiet pause. A memory surfaced without invitation. It wasn't dramatic. There were no crowds. No grand speeches. No perfect soundtrack. Only stillness. And within that stillness came a realization powerful enough to change everything. Some truths do not shout. They whisper. They arrive softly enough that only an honest heart can hear them. For so long, excuses had been easier than honesty. Distance had been easier than vulnerability. Silence had seemed safer than risking disappointment. But every wall built to protect the heart eventually becomes a prison. That is the lesson this story has been moving toward all along. The person at the center of this journey found themselves looking backward instead of forward. Not to relive the past, but to understand it. Moments that once seemed insignificant suddenly carried new meaning. A simple smile. A forgotten conversation. Words that were dismissed too quickly. Kindness that had never been fully appreciated. Sometimes the greatest treasure is only recognized after someone fears they may have already lost it. Meanwhile, your own path has not been wasted. Every challenge has refined your spirit. Every unanswered question has strengthened your patience. Every season of uncertainty has quietly prepared you to receive something with greater wisdom than before. The person you are becoming matters just as much as the destination you hope to reach. Never underestimate what quiet growth can accomplish. People often believe transformation happens in an instant. But true change is built one choice at a time. One lesson at a time. One act of courage after another. That is why last night matters. Not because it solved every question. But because it marked the moment when denial began giving way to truth. There is extraordinary power in admitting what the heart has known all along. Even when no one else hears those words. Even when they are spoken only in silence. They still reshape the future. Yet another piece of this story remains hidden. There is something that followed that realization. A choice. Small enough that it could easily be overlooked. Yet significant enough to alter everything that comes next. It was not a promise spoken aloud. It was not a message sent. It was something much deeper. An inward decision that changed the direction of one heart before anyone else could notice. And when that hidden decision begins to reveal itself, the meaning behind every delay, every unanswered prayer, every unexpected detour, will become clearer than ever before. Because the next part uncovers what happened immediately after that silent decision, and why it may become the turning point neither heart expected. Every meaningful journey reaches a moment when the silence begins to speak louder than the noise. This is that moment. Not because every mystery has already been solved, but because the heart has finally become willing to listen without arguing, without running, and without pretending that nothing has changed. Last night did not end when the lights went out. It lingered. Long after the world became quiet, thoughts continued to echo. Questions refused to disappear. Emotions that had been carefully tucked away began to rise, one after another, asking to be acknowledged instead of ignored. There are nights that pass without leaving a mark. And then there are nights that become the invisible line between who someone was, and who they are about to become. This story crossed that line. For so long, uncertainty seemed to control everything. What if I misunderstood? What if the timing was never right? What if the opportunity has already passed? These questions circled endlessly, never allowing peace to settle. But something shifted. Not outside. Inside. Because real transformation always begins there first. It begins when someone stops searching for the perfect excuse and starts searching for the honest answer. That answer rarely arrives all at once. It unfolds gently. Like the first light of dawn spreading across the horizon. At first, almost nothing seems different. Then suddenly, everything looks different. The heart at the center of this story started recognizing patterns that had been overlooked for far too long. Certain moments now carried unexpected meaning. Unexpected encouragement. Quiet support. Acts of kindness that once seemed ordinary now appeared extraordinary. It became impossible to deny that every encounter had left an impression. Sometimes people don't realize how deeply another person has touched their life until they pause long enough to reflect. Reflection has a way of revealing what constant motion hides. While this realization was taking place, another truth quietly emerged. Growth had happened on both sides. Not identical growth, but necessary growth. One learned patience. The other learned honesty. One discovered resilience. The other discovered humility. Neither lesson felt easy while it was happening. Yet together they formed something stronger than either could have built alone. Perhaps that is why some chapters take longer than expected. Not because hope has disappeared, but because wisdom still has work to do. Every delay has carried a purpose that could only be understood afterward. Even the disappointments became teachers. Even the waiting became preparation. Even the unanswered questions shaped a stronger future. Nothing meaningful was wasted. Then came another quiet realization. One that arrived almost unexpectedly. The future cannot be built by constantly reliving yesterday. Memories can inspire. They can teach. They can heal. But eventually, they must also make room for new beginnings. That realization brought an unfamiliar sense of peace. Not perfect certainty, but peaceful courage. The kind of courage that says, I don't know exactly how everything will unfold, but I no longer want fear to write the next chapter. That single thought changed the direction of this story more than anyone could have imagined. Because fear closes doors that hope is willing to open. And hope, when protected with wisdom, has extraordinary strength. Still, one final piece from last night remains hidden. It was not the reflection. It was not the realization. It was what happened immediately afterward. A quiet response. So subtle that almost no one would recognize its importance. Yet that response may become the beginning of everything that follows. Because sometimes the smallest decision made in complete silence becomes the loudest turning point in an entire story. And that is exactly where the next chapter begins. Have you ever noticed how the most important moments rarely announce themselves? They do not arrive with thunder. They do not demand attention. Instead, they slip quietly into an ordinary evening, waiting for someone to recognize that life is no longer the same. That is where this story now stands. After the long hours of reflection, after every unanswered question had circled through the heart one last time, something unexpected happened. Peace entered. Not the kind of peace that answers every question overnight. The deeper kind. The kind that gently whispers, you no longer have to carry every burden by yourself. It was unfamiliar at first. Almost surprising. For so long, uncertainty had felt like a constant companion that certainty seemed impossible to imagine. Yet when the heart finally released the need to control every outcome, room was created for something far greater. Clarity. Clarity does not always reveal the entire road ahead. Sometimes it simply illuminates the very next step. And often, that is all anyone truly needs. As this new understanding settled in, another realization quietly followed. The story was never only about finding someone else. It was also about becoming the kind of person who could recognize love, protect it with wisdom, and receive it without fear. That kind of transformation cannot be rushed. It must be lived. Every challenge you have faced has been shaping qualities that cannot be purchased or borrowed. Patience. Compassion. Strength. Grace. These are treasures formed through experience, not convenience. Many people spend years searching for answers while overlooking the person they are becoming during the search. But growth has never been a distraction from your purpose. It has always been part of it. Meanwhile, another heart continued wrestling with thoughts that had become impossible to ignore. The questions were no longer about the past. They had become questions about the future. What happens if I remain silent? What happens if I allow fear to decide again? What kind of story will I be left remembering? These questions carried a weight that could no longer be dismissed. Because every meaningful choice eventually asks for courage. Not perfect confidence. Not guaranteed outcomes. Simply courage. There comes a time when waiting feels heavier than moving forward. That realization changed everything. Not because every obstacle disappeared, but because hesitation began losing its power. One quiet decision after another started replacing old habits. Hope slowly became stronger than doubt. Faith became stronger than fear. And the future no longer seemed like something to avoid. It became something worth preparing for. Yet there is one detail that has remained hidden until now. It is not a conversation. It is not a dramatic confession. It is something far more meaningful. A promise. Not spoken loudly. Not written where everyone could see. But carried silently within the heart. A promise to stop allowing yesterday's disappointments to define tomorrow's possibilities. That promise became the invisible turning point. It changed the direction of thoughts. It softened old fears. It opened the door to possibilities that once seemed unreachable. Still, every promise is eventually followed by a test. Not to prove whether it was spoken, but to reveal whether it will be lived. And that test is already closer than anyone realizes. The next chapter uncovers the first unexpected opportunity that appears after this quiet promise, and why recognizing it could change the entire direction of the journey. The first sign that a new chapter has begun is often so gentle that most people overlook it. They continue searching for dramatic moments. For unmistakable signals. For answers that arrive wrapped in certainty. Yet life has a beautiful way of beginning its greatest changes with the smallest invitations. That is exactly what happened next. After the quiet promise settled deep within the heart, the world itself did not suddenly look different. The sun still rose. The hours continued to pass. The familiar routines remained. But something within had changed forever. Perspective. And when perspective changes, everything else slowly begins to follow. What once felt like an ending now appeared to be preparation. What once seemed like rejection now looked more like redirection. What once felt like delay now carried the fingerprints of perfect timing. It is remarkable how one shift in understanding can rewrite an entire story without changing a single memory. The memories remained the same. Only the meaning behind them had transformed. That is wisdom. Wisdom does not erase the past. It teaches the heart how to carry it differently. As this new understanding grew stronger, another realization quietly emerged. No relationship built to last can survive on assumptions alone. Unspoken expectations create confusion. Silent fears create distance. Imagined conclusions often become walls that never needed to exist. Every lasting connection is strengthened by honesty, by patience, and by the willingness to understand before rushing to judge. This truth became impossible to ignore. There had been moments when silence was mistaken for indifference. Moments when distance looked like disinterest. Moments when unanswered questions created stories that were never entirely true. How often do people suffer because they believe the first explanation their fears offer them? Fear is convincing. But it is not always accurate. Hope requires courage because it asks us to remain open when certainty has not yet arrived. That courage is quietly growing now. Not all at once, but steadily. Like the rising tide that changes the shoreline grain by grain until one day the landscape looks completely different. There is no need to rush what is unfolding. Some of life's greatest blessings are strengthened by time. A hurried beginning may impress the eyes. But a steady foundation protects the heart. Remember that. Because what is lasting is rarely built overnight. And neither is trust. Trust grows through consistency. Through quiet choices repeated day after day. Through kindness offered without demanding immediate reward. Through faith that refuses to disappear simply because the road becomes uncertain. These are the qualities that shape stories worth remembering. Yet something else from last night has remained almost invisible. Not because it was hidden, but because its importance could only be understood now. Someone made a decision to stop looking backward with regret. And start looking forward with purpose. That single choice released a burden they had been carrying for far too long. The weight did not disappear instantly. But it became lighter. With every hopeful thought. Every honest reflection. Every quiet act of courage. The future became less intimidating. And for the first time in a long while, possibility felt stronger than fear. Still, one final mystery has yet to unfold. A moment is approaching that neither heart expected. It will not arrive with loud announcements. It will come quietly. Almost naturally. As though every step along this journey had been preparing for that exact encounter. When that moment arrives, everything that seemed confusing will begin to fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for far too long. But before that meeting can take place, there is one last lesson that must be understood. And it may be the most important lesson of this entire journey. There is a lesson that cannot be learned through comfort alone. It is discovered in the quiet spaces. In the moments when no applause is heard. When no one else sees the choices being made. When the heart must decide whether it will continue to believe in goodness, even before it sees the outcome. This is where the journey becomes deeply personal. Not because the destination has suddenly appeared, but because the person walking the path is no longer the same. The greatest transformation rarely announces itself. It reveals itself in simple moments. In the way patience replaces frustration. In the way compassion overcomes resentment. In the way peace slowly takes the place of restless wondering. These changes may seem small. Yet they are powerful enough to shape an entirely new future. Last night became meaningful for one reason above all others. It invited a heart to become honest. Honest about what truly mattered. Honest about what had been hidden behind pride. Honest about the hopes that had quietly survived, even after seasons of disappointment. Honesty is never weakness. It is one of the bravest gifts a person can offer. Because honesty asks us to remove every mask. Every excuse. Every carefully built wall. Until only truth remains. And truth has a remarkable way of setting new beginnings into motion. There comes a moment when looking away is no longer possible. That moment has arrived in this story. No more pretending that certain memories meant nothing. No more convincing the heart that its deepest feelings would simply disappear with time. No more allowing fear to speak louder than hope. Instead, a quiet resolve began to grow. Not fueled by emotion alone, but by wisdom. Wisdom understands that meaningful relationships are not built on perfection. They are built on grace. On forgiveness. On choosing understanding when misunderstanding would be easier. On believing that people can grow beyond the mistakes that once defined them. Growth is the language of every lasting story. Without growth, every chapter repeats itself. With growth, even old pages begin pointing toward a brighter ending. As this realization settled into place, another unexpected thought emerged. Perhaps the greatest miracle is not that circumstances change. Perhaps it is that hearts do. Because when a heart changes, words change. Choices change. Priorities change. And eventually, the entire direction of life begins changing as well. This is why what happened last night continues to matter. It was never simply about remembering. It was about awakening. Awakening to gratitude. Awakening to courage. Awakening to the understanding that some opportunities deserve to be cherished rather than postponed. Still, every awakening is followed by action. A seed awakened by spring must still reach toward the light. A traveler who finally sees the path must still choose to take the first step. Understanding alone is not enough. It must become action. And somewhere ahead, a quiet opportunity is waiting. It may appear ordinary at first. A conversation. A shared smile. An unexpected moment of kindness. Something so simple that many people would pass by without recognizing its importance. But those who have learned the lessons of patience, honesty, and hope will recognize it immediately. Because they will understand that life often changes through ordinary moments filled with extraordinary meaning. The story is drawing closer to its turning point. The silence that once separated two paths is beginning to fade. The questions that once seemed impossible are preparing to give way to understanding. And the next chapter reveals the moment when everything that has been unfolding beneath the surface finally begins to rise into the light, where nothing remains hidden anymore.